Hello, my name is Billy Jones, and I am a member of the South Florida Writers Association. It is with pleasure that I introduce our next segment of our South Florida Writers Association Author Showcase Series, a virtual experience, our July 2020 edition. The South Florida Writers Association is a special organization housed right here in South Florida, but membership is nationwide. Our purpose is to create a forum by which traditional, published, and independent authors can come together, share their talents and experiences, and support one another all the same. This virtual showcase is a remix of what we traditionally do face-to-face with our partner, Books and Books at Pinecrest. But in the wake of the recent COVID-19, we decided to take our experience remotely so that our members and, of course, readers and enthusiasts alike will get the opportunity to see some of the amazing and talented writers that we have as members of South Florida Writers Association. It is with great pleasure that I introduce the bio of our speaker and author today, Lori Swick. Lori published written works, including the historical fiction novel, Comfort and Mirth, in 2009, and a nonfiction book titled Dreaming, the Sacred Art, back in 2014. She's an award-winning poet and essayist. Her PhD is in religion and philosophy with a concentration in women's spirituality. And she instructs religion and philosophy as an adjunct university professor. She currently resides in Miami, Florida. I also have to personally say that I had the pleasure of seeing Lori present at our 10th annual Mango Writers Conference, which was held back in February 2020 in Miami Springs, Florida. And we had so many diverse, talented, amazing speakers, but I must admit, Lori was one of my most favorite. She provided such depth, and I think you're going to see how wonderful she is, and her focus of her works, just how that plays out. It is with great pleasure that I introduce my colleague and member of SFWA, Lori Swick. Lori.
Thank you, Billy, and thanks for such a nice introduction. And I want to thank you and all my friends at South Florida Writers Association and Books and Books for just allowing me this opportunity to share my work. That always means a lot to me. I'd go ahead and like to start talking about Dreaming the Sacred Art, if you wouldn't mind pulling the next slide for me. I do have to say I have a real thunderstorm going on here all of a sudden, so if you hear any feedback on that, you'll know it's not me growling. But I was asked to write this book by the editor of Skylight Paths Publishing when she saw on my website that I was working on a book entitled Women Dreaming as a Sacred Art. And she contacted me and asked me if I'd write a general book about it. And I did not say no. So this came about. They were doing an Art of Spiritual Living series, and it fit in really nicely. And pardon the pun, it was a dream to work on. I was, dreaming, reading about dreaming, thinking about dreaming, writing about dreaming, dreaming about dreaming. Just the writing of it was just an amazing process. But basically, the book is structured in 4 parts around the 4 integral parts of dreaming as a sacred art. The first being able to enter dream space or incubate dreams, being able to navigate through dreams that one perceives as sacred, being able to interpret those dreams, and then being able to use that for further art, for healing, just for spiritual growth, and being able to take that into your waking life and just establish a really interesting continuity between the two. I might have heard that thunder. But anyway, next slide, please, Billy. My method was I've taught world religions for many, many years. I'm just totally fascinated with it. And I went and I researched a lot of the dreaming practices throughout all the different world scriptures, throughout what was written about the different worlds' mythology, and really studied what was going on with that. And then in the Western world, where we're more secularized, just dream research has more to do with the psychological aspect of it, the scientific aspect of actually studying dream sleep and the process of it. So I researched both in depth and sort of borrowed from one into the other and put together and integrated what I thought was really meaningful in terms of what we can use today to build a really great sacred art practice that's used for us in our lives within the context of how we live and sleep and dream. So anyway, just to sort of show a little overview of some of the things I looked at. This particular slide has to do traditional Eastern sacred dreaming and Near Eastern, I should say. These are just a few of the many, many examples of how pervasive the dream is within the history of the world's spiritual thought and practice and systems. The top one is a picture of an actual creation story about Vishnu from Hinduism, who is lying on the Hydra, the many-headed snake, and he's dreaming. And he's in a great ocean of water, and out of his navel, as he dreams this huge lotus coming out, and this little figure in the middle is the god Brahma. And that's one of the beautiful creation stories, and much more could be said about the symbolism in that. But for our purposes, the story is basically saying the world was created out of a dream by God. The lower picture is actually a painting that was done of Muhammad when he went on his night of power and glory through the sky and visited all the different prophets and was sent back and told to recite the Quran. This was a very dream-like experience, and it's actually debated whether it was an actual sleeping dream or whether it was a visualized dream. But as you'll see as we work through this a little bit more, that dreaming in most traditions, especially in the ancient traditions, there wasn't that much of a difference between a sleeping type dream and a waking type dream. But the point is here, this really dream-like quality is wherein this religion was based, the very foundation of it. So next slide, please. And some of the world's indigenous traditions even today, the dreaming is so much a part of life. And the spiritual aspect of dreaming is just so infused with their waking spiritual practices and their total life, living in nature in general. The top picture here is an indigenous Aboriginal painting of the dream time, which is the creation story actually for the Aboriginals. And the belief is that the ancestors came in this amazing dream and they set up the world, they formed the land, they poured the waters into the oceans, they set up cultures, they set up communities, they taught people language. They basically came and set up the world and kind of receded into things. But the belief is now, and I don't fully understand it, I really would love to do more research on it, but that the dream time continues. So you have this just totally expansive, pervasive, timeless concept of dream, in a very spiritual, sacred way. And of course, the traditional Native American Indian religions are very based in belief and practice and thought on dreams and the quality of dreams and sharing dreams. And the thing about these communities that I think we in the West have so much to learn from is that they take their night dreams into their waking lives. They talk about them more. And when you do that, you find out a lot of people are having these amazing dreams that, until you share them and talk about them, you can't really appreciate it. But dreaming is a huge part of who becomes a shaman in a native tradition Indian setting, and just how they conduct life in general. Next slide, please. So here in the West, again, as I said, we have this traditional approach to dreaming. Two of the pervasive ways that we study dreaming right now is through psychology, and especially depth psychologists in the last century or so, like Freud and Jung, added a lot to our concept of dream when they started delving into the different levels of consciousness and how symbols or dream-like thinking, as Jung called it, really works within our minds. And then, of course, we have actual sleep labs now where we have people sleep in the lab and we can measure their rapid eye movement and we can tell what stages of sleep they're in when they're having dreams. And that has really taught us a lot about how we dream and how we can function, how we can program ourselves to dream in a sacred way. Next slide, please. But again, I borrowed from the two traditions, and that's kind of the foundation and method for this book. Now, I want to go through the different parts of the book, the 4 parts that I spoke about earlier, and say a little bit about how I developed the chapters and then this journey through the dream world. The first part is about entering sacred dream space. And basically, it's about the art of cultivating or incubating sacred dreams. In other words, if you want to have a sacred dream, These are some things that I found out through my research that have been done traditionally throughout the world. These are some things that I found out that people are doing in the contemporary world that can help facilitate that process. And one really interesting thing about this is, as I went through and studied all the indigenous traditions from all over the world, not just in one place. I mean, before there was probably a lot of communication. Oh, are you still there, Billy? Are you there? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you well.
Okay, I'm sorry. Everything went dead here. I'll continue. I'm sorry. Okay, so in other words, there were a lot of ritual things that I found that were across the board done in a lot of different traditions. There were snakes in a lot of the different myths or the different ideas or the different writings about how to incubate sacred dreams. There was almost always a ritual purification process by water. Always lighting of lamps or fire or candles. All of these things, when you look across the different traditions, popped out of every account of how to incubate yourself to have a sacred dream. And then you set a dream intention. And so basically what I did was take this information and I put it into sort of a how to, at the end of the chapter, how to orient yourself towards sacred dreaming. That's really fun. So anyway, next slide, please. My second chapter and this first part is the thin veil between waking and dreaming consciousness. And I touched on this earlier. And that is that in a lot of traditions, there isn't a perceived big difference between waking visions and dreaming, sleeping dreams, okay? What this does is it enables people to take their dream life into their waking life and back again in a very, very fluid manner. And so dreams become naturally more of a part of the cultural expression and more of a part of the sacred experience, not just when dreaming, but also when awake. This part of the book also gave me a chance to study more in depth what current research is telling us about the different levels of consciousness and how they're affected by different stages of dream and sleep, which is really interesting. And one really crazy fun fact that I stumbled upon is when I was studying this, I was reading about the different stages of sleep and how it's affected by our dreams. And then if you go back, the ancient Hindu texts, the Vedas, the Upanishads from the Vedas, and you look at the Mundaka Upanishad, they outline almost exactly the same process. And they talk about sleep and dreamless sleep. And they had it figured out without all the machines 4,000 years ago. So anyway, I thought that was quite fascinating. Next slide, please. The second part of the book is about really enjoying, really getting the fullness out of the sacred dream experience. And I did a chapter on mystical dreaming just to sort of explain the characteristics of what people's experiences historically and according to contemporary studies have been done about what a dream is like when you have a sacred dream. And there's four really main types that people have. They're not exclusive by any means. But the first one is transcendent dreaming, where you actually dream yourself out of your body, if you will, and into the weather of the forever. It can be like an expansive experience like one has when they're meditating. It can take many different forms, but it's where you actually have a dream where you're leaving the confines of your physical self and being assumed into the all, if you will, in some way or another. A second one that's commonly had is visitation dreams, where people dream that they're being visited by someone who has gone before them, and usually with some sort of sacred content or intention. And this is a sort of thing that since my book came out, and I've been doing a lot of dreaming seminars and retreats, that when people get together and talk about dreams, so many people have these. And among the people who do, their experience was so profound and meaningful and memorable that they really felt like they had a total experience. That person was really there with them. It's really quite an amazing thing. Another type of dream that people have, of course, is divine presence dream, where whatever one conceives of as being divine, they have an actual experience of. And for a lot of people, whether or not they are part of a systematized religious system or not, this has to do with some aspect of light, hence lighting lights in dream incubation processes. But this concept of going into light or being assumed by light is another pervasive thing that people dream about a lot. Actually. And prophetic dreams, it can be very sacred dreams. When you dream about something that's going to happen, and it does, it's a tremendous sacred experience. And again, this is something that when you get people together talking about their dreams, it happens a lot more than people realize. Next slide, please. Lucid dreaming is a sacred art. Well, if you know you're dreaming, you can enjoy the process a whole lot more and even direct it. And I love this this particular painting of lucid dreaming, because a lot of people, when they realize they're dreaming, the first thing they want to do is take off and fly. I know I do, who wouldn't, especially nowadays when we're all stuck inside. But anyway, my book in this part, I give some really practical advice on how you can learn. You can, if you already dream as a lucid dreamer, you can direct yourself through sacred dreaming in a way that might be more meaningful. And if you're not, you can train yourself to have lucid dreams. Next slide, please. The two leaders in the East meets West of lucid dreaming, that each one really bears a little separate attention and mention, and I drew off them heavily because they just really are the two really large resources if you're talking about the Western concept of sacred dreaming and the Eastern concept. Stephen LaBerge has done a lot of research on lucid dreaming, and a book that he co-wrote with, I think it's Howard Rheingold. It's called Exploring the World Through Lucid Dreaming. You should get it right after you read my book. But he really talks a lot about how to practically teach yourself to dream as a lucid dreamer, how to, part of his book that I really love and I used a lot, because I used to have night terrors a lot, where you'd wake up and you'd know you were dreaming and you couldn't wake your body up, and then you'd see horrible things happening. And he gives real practical advice on what to do. He says you can do things like just look at your hands. Usually when you see your hands, you'll wake up. Or try to spin around. If you spin around in a dream, a lot of time you can break the dream sequence. It was quite fascinating. But aside from that, he really brings to the table the modern research on lucid dreaming. Whereas this blow-away book by Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche on the Tibetan bone system of the yogas of dream and sleep, it's very meditative. It talks about how to meditate, but mostly it tells you how to go into dream states. It tells you this fantastic stuff you can do in your dreams, and it's just, it's if you get a chance, read it, because it's just amazing. But this book is like a companion book to the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the Bardo Thodol. And the purpose is that, dreaming, if you can navigate yourself through dreaming in such a way, you can learn to navigate from one life to another after death, which is basically what the Tibetan Book of the Dead is all about. So it's like this huge thing where you're practicing up to navigate from one life to another, and it's quite fascinating. But anyway, I learned a lot of lucid dreaming from a lot of sources, but these two in particular gave me a real strong bearing on what was going on in these different poles of lucid dreaming. Next slide. Okay, my third part is, after you have these dreams and you know you're dreaming them, what do you do with them? How do you bring them into your life? How do you interpret them? So my next chapter was on sacred dream recall, because if you can't remember your dream, you can't work with it. I have had so many people tell me, since I've been doing these webinars and talking about dreams, so many people tell me they don't dream at all. And everybody dreams. I mean, it's a proven fact. People can't survive psychologically without dreaming. And most people dream if they sleep a full night at least 3 times and have 3 dramatic dreams. You just don't tend to remember them if you don't wake up within a certain amount of time from them. And sometimes, you'll have a dream that your psyche is trying to impress upon you so deeply that, it will be kind of traumatically memorable. But you can train yourself to remember your dreams. And the main way is, and I'll just briefly touch on it in the interest of time, is to rehearse them. When you first wake up, ask yourself immediately, what was I dreaming? Because everybody wakes up usually within 90 to 100 minutes with cycles. We usually don't remember it because we go right back to sleep. But you can train yourself to realize you're waking up and asking yourself what you were dreaming. And then as soon as it starts coming back, rehearse it. Think yourself through the dream again. And more could be said about this, but and hopefully you'll read it in the book. But you can remember your dreams, and you can remember a lot more of your dreams if you work with these methods and try to train yourself. Next slide, please. Okay, then once you remember your dream, I did a chapter on how do you interpret them, because we do dream in symbols. We dream in dreamlike thought, clusters of images. I know you've had dreams where, you're dreaming along and everything's fine, then all of a sudden everything changes, and you're in a totally different dream and everything's different. And when you're dreaming, it all seems fine. But then when you wake up, if you think back on it, it's like, wait a minute. But that's just how our mind works. It's associations and impressions. So this part of the book is about working with that and trying to figure out what that's trying to say to you. I have a 4-part method for this that I think works really well. And the first one is keep a dream journal. Whenever you can, right after you rehearse your dream, write it down. Write every little single thing you can remember, even if it doesn't seem important right then, because you will be amazed when you start looking at the big pictures of your dreams, what symbols start poking out as being significant. Basically, record things that are curious or weird or out of place, which happens a lot in dreams, right? Symbol systems. If you see, like, you have a dream and over here there's a feather and over there was a feather, then you might not realize it in the dream, you might not realize it while you're journaling it, but all of a sudden you might look at this and go, hey, there's feathers, what do they mean? Interpret the symbols and symbol systems. You can do this. There's a lot of good dream books about dream symbols, and I would suggest looking at them. I would look up ancient history of these things, because we can tap into like ancient consciousness for these, according to depth psychologists, which I'm really beginning to think works. But also ask yourself what you associate with it. And more could be said about this, because it's a fun and fascinating process. But then after you do all that, then get all the symbols together, and you can flow with that and just start letting the dream speak to you in terms of what it means. And it's an aha thing. It happened in your psyche and your consciousness. So when you start putting the right pieces together, you're going to know that was it. But anyway, it's a really fun process. Next slide, please. So the 4th part of my book is taking all this wonderful dream work. Now that you're learning to dream, you're learning to dream lucidly. You can direct yourself to your dream. And when you're lucid dreaming, you can talk to people in the dream. Say if you had a visitation dream, you can say, oh, I know I'm dreaming, and talk to the people, engage with them. If you have a monster that recurs in your dream, you can ask your monster, what do you want? And a lot of times when they tell you, they'll go away and never bother you again. If you have a sacred dream, of a mystical meeting with a divine power, you can interface with it. You can direct yourself through these things. So anyway, that's really fun. But after you've learned how to do all this, after you've journaled, after you start interpreting, that's when the real beauty of the dream work works. When you can take this into your waking life and put it into your art expression. This is a painting by Salvador Dali, who really drew a lot on his dreams. And the otherworldly quality of it, this one actually is called The Broken Bridge of the Dream Crop. And here's the great thing about dream art, whether you're doing it just for yourself, for healing or understanding, a lot of times when you really draw on the deep meaning of your dreams, if you've examined them, it's going to touch other people, because it's going to affect, other people's emotions that, even if it's not in their consciousness, they dream about, and it's in their psyches. Like this particular painting, even if you don't know the story of what's going on, you can identify with it. The different colors, the fading of people, because there's a woman dancing in the forefront. I don't know how well you can see it, but there's a lot of emotional context in it that even if we can't articulate what we're feeling, because it's based on dreams, we can relate to it and have strong feelings about it. That's what dream art works like. Right? Poetry, dancing, theater, whatever your art expression is, journaling, dream journaling, art journaling, put your dreams into your artwork, because here's the great thing that happens. You dream, you journal, you think about it. As you're working on the art, more of what's important or significant about that dream is going to start popping out. Then you get what I call the sacred dream feedback loop. And that is after you work with the art with your dream, then you can take that back into your next night's sleep and do an intention to expand on that. Your mind is full of it, and you very well might go back into another dream that goes even deeper into what's going on with it. It's a fascinating process. I mean, if you can get to that level with it, it takes time, but now that a lot of us are spending more time at home, it's a perfect time to experiment with it. But anyway, it's really good fun. Next slide, please. Another way that people work with their sacred dreams that's quite fascinating is in healing. Again, Native American tradition are famous for this. And I mentioned how a lot of times the shaman of a tribe is somebody who has very significant sacred dreams. But a lot of times the shaman is someone who, when they were very young, got terribly sick and would have died, but through their dreams they healed themselves. And then once that happened, you know, they're considered a conduit between the sacred and, you know, the people living here on earth. And so they have this communication. So that's at the root of how a lot of shamans become the shamans of not just Native American Indian tribes, but a lot of indigenous traditions. But again, the dream spirituality of that for healing. And there are Native Americans today who are writing a lot about their traditions of dream healing that are really fascinating. I had the good fortune of reading several of them while I was working on this book, and I think more have even come out since then. But it's just a great thing to study and think about, and we have a lot to learn from it. In the ancient world, ancient Greece and Rome, temples to Asclepius were everywhere. Huge temples. They were kind of like today's retreat spas, if you will. It's where people went to heal. They'd have big rolling green lawns with fountains, and people would walk and relax. But then on the inside, the dream was the healing component. They would light lamps. They would chant. They would get together and, you know, do therapy and all. But the basis of the healing was each person went into a separate room to dream, and they would lay down on a bed called a klein, which they think was the origin of the word clinic today, and they would sleep. Snakes roam freely. Non-poisonous snakes roam freely in and out of the rooms and on the lawns. Again, a very, very pervasive dream symbol. And people would dream. And if they didn't dream about Asclepius, they would dream about one of his daughters, Hygeia or Panacea. And they would come to him and tell them in dreams, and they would stay there and dream until they got the answer to whatever they needed healing for, whether it was physical, mental, emotional. But anyway, again, I think we have a lot to learn from ancient and other traditions about how to heal ourselves through dreaming. Next slide, please. Okay, when I was asked to write this book, I said, sure, I'd be happy to, but I really would like to include a chapter about the special characteristics of gender in dreaming, because the history of women in dreams and the history of sacred dreaming is I think, super interesting. A lot of the world scriptures that have been handed down to us or that we still have extant from the earliest writings, they're patriarchal in nature. They were written by men who were in control of the religious and political systems, who are writing basically for men with male concerns. And what little of what women's actual dreams were in them are almost exclusively about women dreaming dreams about giving birth to an auspicious male heir. This particular picture is of Maya, the Buddhist Maya, dreaming about Ganapati Ganesh, if you will, the elephant spirit coming to her and impregnating her with Siddhartha Gautama Buddha. And this is kind of what's been handed down to us. However, when I really looked through and researched a lot of the history of dreams in sacred scripture, what was really interesting is that when you look at the male dreams, which we have a lot more recounted of, women played significant roles in it. If not women, then goddesses. But women were guides. You know, they would have like a goddess guides within their dreams who would guide the king, if you were. like in the case of the Epic of Gilgamesh, and a lot of places in Mesopotamia, women were guides. Isis in Egypt was a dream guide, and we see this historically. They were guardians. Heteras and Buddhists were like dream guardians that would guard people while they were dreaming and stand over them and watch over them. Women's prophecy and dream is huge. Has been historically. Women's interpretation of dreams, a lot of males would take their dreams to their wives in different scriptures and have their wives tell them what it meant. But women's prophecy is really strong, even in religions where women don't have much voice otherwise. There's a huge culture of ritual, it's called Iskara in the Islam tradition, where women foresee dreams about younger women who are about to get married. It's a very common and wonderful thing. If you look at scripture, like in the case of, I was raised Catholic Christian, when Herod was washed his hands of, being responsible for the crucifixion of Jesus, he did it because of his wife's dream. And you see this a lot, not just in Christianity, but in a lot of scripture, that women as interpreters and prophetic dreamers has a really, really rich tradition. And I could say a lot more about that, but I won't have time. But at the end, I did a little conclusion, just talking about nurturing the sacred in dreams and how to carry it forward, and how much fun it is to have a dream group to share dreams. Because when people get together and share dreams regularly, it'll be really interesting, but more than one person can have similar, very, very similar dreams. It's a really fun, fascinating, wonderful thing. Plus, just as I said earlier, I think we have a lot to learn from traditions that do this, because we can't take our dreaming back into our life when it's such a personal thing that we can't feel like we can share it. There's no way to open up with that and to grow from it. Anyway, I really encourage that. Dream retreats are great. And it just enjoy the process. Let your dreaming life really inform and enrich your waking life, and your waking life can really enrich and inform your dreaming life. And it can all be a very sacred, spiritual, magical process. And I will stop there, Billy, because the storm stopped.
Oh, that was wonderful. Thank you so much, Lori, for sharing your work. And folks, if you haven't done so already, please view down below in the link for this video, where you'll find information of how A, to reach Lori, B, where to find her works and where to purchase them, and of course, to stay connected with us here through the South Florida Writers Association. It is with great pleasure that we recognize that throughout the upcoming months, we will continue to provide a forum via virtual/remote for our readers, our members, and just enthusiasts alike to learn more about the writers and members of South Florida Writers Association, the things that they're doing, the creative works that they are engaged with. And I think the key here that we all have to keep in mind, and I'm sure Lori will agree, and that is the following. It is through the humanities that we're really keeping connected with the world. And so through these unique, unprecedented times, authors are still doing great things, sharing ideas with the world. Thank you for watching this segment of our Author Showcase series or virtual experience.